Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Panel 5C Creature Features. It's my pleasure to introduce our four panelists, starting with Sharon Diane King. Sharon Diane King, PhD from the University of California, Los Angeles in comparative literature, is an associate at UCLA's CMRS and a writer, translator, and director of the early modern theater troupe Les Enfants Sans Abri. Thank you. Les Enfants Sans Abri. My French is terrible. Forgive me. Her latest academic work appears in The Post-Zombie, Essays on the Current and Future State of the Walking Dead. We're after that going to have Erin Suzuki from the University of California, San Diego. Erin Suzuki is an associate professor in the literature department at the University of California, San Diego. She received her PhD in English from the University of California, Los Angeles, some more UCLA representation. Her research interests include Asian American literatures, Pacific Island literature, speculative fiction, and eco-criticism. She is the author of Ocean Passages, Navigating Pacific Islander and Asian American Literatures, and is currently developing a book project that asks how representations of undersea creatures in trans-Pacific literature and pop culture can help us think critically and creatively about the intersections of climate change and settler colonialism. Then we'll have Sam Lasman from the University of Oregon. Sam Lasman is an assistant professor of English at the University of Oregon. His research focuses on the monstrous, parahuman, and non-human in medieval narrative literature from the British Isles and the Iranian world, and his writing has appeared in venues including JGEP, Arthuriana, Post-Medieval, and the Global Medieval Sourcebook. And then we'll have Madison Ellis from Bowling Green State University. Madison Ellis, she/her, is a current PhD student in the Department of Theater and Film at Bowling Green State University. Her dissertation research dissects notions of monstrosity in dramatic worlds across the shifting landscapes of feminist movements. As an actor, director, and scholar, she gravitates towards all things strange, unruly, and curious. Please let's welcome our first speaker.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for coming to see us this morning. I know the 9 a.m. panel is a bit of a slog, so I'm very appreciative. I'm also very appreciative to all of the organizers who've put this conference together. This is my first time here, and it's been such a treat and an honor, so thank you for all of your work. So I'll try to be quick because I know we're on a timeline. So today, the paper that I'll be presenting today is part of a larger book project, as Elizabeth mentioned, called Beasts from the Deep. And it's thinking about how modern pop culture sea monsters embody anxieties around shifting definition of the humans and of life itself in the context of ongoing settler colonial violence, economic globalization, and climate change. So the work I'll be presenting today is a case study on one of the biggest bads in contemporary pop culture, the man-eating shark. What other animal can strike fear in the hearts of humans through metonymic representation alone? We've been conditioned by movies, TV shows, and other visual media to see just the image of a fin cutting through water and immediately to know, get out, there's danger below. The association of the mere presence of sharks with the fear of potential and imminent attack is part of what Christopher Neff has called the Jaws effect, after the blockbuster Steven Spielberg film. In Jaws, Spielberg used horror-inspired film techniques and music to portray its central character, a great white shark, as an implacable monster bent on seeking out and devouring human flesh. While the imagery from Jaws and its distinctive soundtracking continue to inform mainstream perceptions and representations of sharks to this day, Spielberg was not the first to represent sharks as being defined primarily by their ferocity and ravenous appetites. Margaret Cohen points out that pioneering documentarians Jacques Cousteau and Louis Maillet were the first to adapt to the shot-countershot pattern found in horror sequences of violence in their 1956 documentary, The Silent World. Their depiction of a shark feeding frenzy shifted between the underwater perspectives of the predator and its prey, using blurry, jerky camera movements to promote an atmosphere of fear and panic. And it ends with a topside view of the bloodied, churning water, a trope that would recur in Jaws and many other shark movies thereafter. Cousteau and Maillet's depiction of shark carnage, as Cohen points out, is a deliberately crafted aesthetic. Other contemporary depictions of sharks in their habitat dispensed with the melodrama of frenzy and simply showed sharks gliding alongside divers underwater. Indeed, as many ocean scientists and conservationists have been at pains to emphasize, most sharks are not aggressive towards humans, and all sharks are far more endangered by humans than the other way around. Yet the representation of sharks as insatiable killing machines has dominated the popular imagination to the point where, as Neff has argued, the narrative of human-shark conflict has overwhelmed evidence-based science. So how and why has this become the case? As apex predators of the sea, sharks are, as Jennifer Martin has noted, among the few remaining creatures with the power to invert the traditional hierarchy of human-animal relations, and they serve as a reminder of the ecological limits of our story-making selves. Man-eating sharks provide a stark reminder that humans are part of a food chain and that we remain connected to non-human others not only through our appetites, but also theirs. They blur the boundary between human and non-human worlds, much like the louse, by disturbing that perceptual boundary that lies between what counts as a person and what is merely meat. In this context, the sharks in the films must die in order for the humans in the film, not to mention the spectating humans in the audience, to reclaim not only a sense of agency, but exceptionality. The sense of agency is generally achieved through what Brett Mills calls a moment of ingenuity that occurs in each shark movie, as the death of the threat has to be achieved through creative means, serving to indicate that this is, in the end, a battle between the supposedly wholly instinctive beast and the rational, thoughtful ingenuity of humanity. The hero defeating the shark comes to stand in for humans, overcoming our vulnerability to non-human animals and environments, asserting that humanity is not so much a part of nature as its master. While shark's status as a feared predator has a long literary history, Mills argues that prior to the 20th century, human-shark interactions were usually not characterized as attacks, and when sharks did bite humans, the blame was typically laid at the feet of the human, who was, after all, in the shark's realm. By contrast, the rhetoric of the shark attack assumes that sharks are inherently aggressive and normalizes the destruction of the shark as a legitimate and unarguable response. Neff and others note that shark hunting became a more popular pastime in the years following Jaws, to the point that their status as increasingly endangered species was not fully understood for many years until marine scientists were able to gather information showing steep population declines. A 2021 study published in Nature magazine found that since 1970, globally, the abundance of oceanic sharks decreased by 71% from 1970 to 2018, and 24 of 31 oceanic shark species have populations so low they are considered to be threatened or critically endangered. Yet, despite the dwindling number of real sharks, the number of cinematic sharks have proliferated, ultimately giving birth to an entire film genre, right, defined as sharksploitation, which finds increasingly creative and over-the-top and ridiculous ways for sharks to kill and be killed. So it is our appetite for destruction, and not necessarily the sharks that must be slaked by this genre's ever more improbable acts of violence. Indeed, the very attributes that we tend to project onto sharks, appetite, ferocity, ruthlessness among them, are qualities that humans tend to alternately condemn and admire as well. Such affective connections complicate the straightforward opposition of human and shark established within these shark narratives. The ambivalent identification with the figure of the shark can certainly be intuited from the ongoing popularity of sharksploitation franchises and the fandoms built around them. However, even these fandoms often obsess over the shark's power and not necessarily its vulnerabilities. By contrast, the human-shark encounter, dramatized in the shark hunt comprising the opening sequence of Apple TV's 2025 television miniseries Chief of War, attempts to do both of these things. So in this scene, the 18th century Hawaiian chieftain Kaiana, who is played by series co-producer Jason Momoa, is shown leaping off of an outrigger canoe to subdue a shark. As with other shark movies, the film juxtaposes underwater and surface shots to heighten tension. So the camera cuts a gratuitous shot. So the camera cuts back and forth between Kaiana gliding underwater with the shark and the crew anxiously scanning the surface of the water from above. But unlike the surface shots from Silent World or Jaws, where the bubbling up of bloody water and body parts hint at all the horrors going on below, Kaiana suddenly pops up with the unconscious shark in tow, both of them whole in body. The camera then sets itself at the midpoint between the surface and the water, showing Kaiana above and the shark below. And as the crew prepares to tow them to shore, the scene ends with Kaiana pressing his head to the shark, telling him, "Make o e ola no mako," or "In your death may life be preserved." Scored by a mournful yet rising Hans Zimmer soundtrack, the scene is not designed to incite feelings of horror or triumph so much as a kind of melancholy. In this episode, and throughout the series as a whole, Kaiana is often portrayed as a skilled warrior who is forced to exert violence against his will. The shark operates in this case not as an antagonist so much as a metaphor for Kaiana himself. They are both predators who must play that role to sustain their respective ecosystems. This portrayal of shark-human interactions is more broadly in keeping with Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiian attitudes that treat sharks not as object or entities that are fundamentally alien from and opposed to humankind, but rather as figures who share certain qualities with us. As depicted in this scene, the killing of a niuhi or man-eating shark was a task that was traditionally restricted to high chiefs or other leaders who would then, with the understanding that some of the shark's ferocity would then transfer to the chief, an idea that Kanaka Maoli scholar and translator Mary Kavena Pukui notes is expressed by the Olelo No'eau, or proverb, He ma no holo aina ke ali'i, or the chief is a shark that travels on the land. Yet, the sharing of these qualities could go in the opposite direction as well. Aumakua, or guardian sharks, were sharks that harbored the spirits and characteristics of a human who had passed. Such sharks were said to be recognized by their distinctive markings and were fed and cared for by, as family members or by local guardians. Noelani Punivai points out that many of the mo'olelo or legends about locally known aumakua or niuhi sharks were not mere superstitions or fairy tales, but worked as oral archives and modes of knowledge production. Her research shows how different kinds of shark legends and proverbs align with historical and taxonomic data collected on shark behavior and travel patterns in and around the Hawaiian Islands, helping to make the case that these beliefs and practices about sharks emerge not only out of imagination or fantasy, but out of careful longitudinal observation of the oceanic environment and the role that sharks played within it. Punivai argues that the storying practice of connecting certain legendary shark aumakua or niuhi to specific environments and migratory patterns mitigates the image of sharks as thoughtless killing machines. Instead, it offers us a way to see how sharks exert more complex relational and place-based forms of agency. Such stories foreground the ways that the fates of both humans and sharks are inextricably entangled with one another. In story after story, whenever those interconnections are disavowed, that is, when one animal is so driven by appetite that they can see the other as nothing more than meat, it leads inevitably to their death. The knowledge passed on through such parables could not be more clear. But in an age where the kinds of situated and relational forms of knowledge offered by mo'olelo has been largely eclipsed by the bombastic spectacles offered by the mainstream shark film, how might we tell shark stories that carry the lessons of the past while adjusting for the circumstances of the present? By way of an answer, I would like to conclude with a reading of All My Relations, which is a short story by a Kanaka Maoli writer and scholar Brian Kamaoli Kuwada. It's a speculative sequel of sorts to the mo'olelo of Ka'ahupahau, the queen shark and protectress of Pu'uloa on Oahu, who famously defeated the niuhi who entered her territory and declared that no shark would eat any human flesh in the waters under her protection. It's also important to know that Pu'uloa, as background, which was a historically abundant site for agriculture and aquaculture, was taken over by the U.S. military and is today better known as Pearl Harbor, whose waters are so toxic that you can't eat anything from there, as that sign shows. So Kuwata's story is set in the present day, and it's narrated from the point of view of an unnamed ancient Niuhi who can take on human form. He hates humankind, and he craves the taste of their flesh, yet he has refrained from attacking for over 200 years because he remains bound by the edict of Ka'ahupahau, who had defeated him in battle. And although Ka'ahupahau and her brother Kahiuka had disappeared long ago, the Niuhi continues to abide by her decree to stay away from humans because he still adheres to our traditions and our hierarchy. One day, the Niuhi, in his human form, unintentionally befriends a young boy who he sarcastically names Uncle. While he's initially dismissive of Uncle, the boy's persistence eventually wears him down, and the Niuhi begrudgingly teaches him how to spearfish. As he spends more time with Uncle, the Niuhi approvingly notes the spark of hunger in the boy's eyes and even admires his swift progress as a fisherman and a hunter. Yet at the same time, he is disgusted by human greed and wastefulness, observing in a bitter aside to the reader that you idiot bone sacks have killed so much reef and habitat with your sunscreen and your dumping and messed up the food chain with your longliners and your overfishing. You know what pisses me off even more, though? You don't even eat the fish that yourself. You send it off for other people far from here to eat. There is no justice in that. He repeats that line, there is no justice in that, when he warns Uncle against taking too many fish, not only the fish he needs to feed his family, but extra to sell for money. Uncle uses the money he makes from selling his catch to buy a GoPro, which he uses to shoot footage for his YouTube channel. This is another pastime that Niuhi has no patience for. One day, when they are out fishing, several other sharks are attracted to their kill. Although the Niuhi tells Uncle to escape onto the kayak, the boy turns and uses his spear gun on the largest tiger shark. Too focused on getting the kill on camera, Uncle misses his mark and wounds rather than kills the tiger shark, condemning it to a slow and painful death. While Uncle is pleased that he was able to catch the shot on film, the Niuhi is so repulsed that he rejects the burgeoning sense of kinship that had been developing between himself and the boy. For the third and final time, the Niuhi reflects, there was no justice in that, and he transforms back into his shark form and feasts on the boy. All My Relations thus deploys many of the horror tropes used in the sharksploitation film. The Niuhi is a bloodthirsty beast, and he does view the world through the lens of a hungry predator. The story also locks humans and sharks into a narrative of conflict where only one can survive. It is simply that in this telling, the positions are reversed, and it is the humans who pose the greatest threat and must be eliminated. Yet even though the story follows many familiar beats, it also opens up possibilities to imagine otherwise. The Niuhi is driven by hunger, but that hunger is stayed for over 200 years because of his respect for our traditions and our hierarchy. Not the anthropocentric traditional hierarchy that places humans on top, but the traditions that shape an understanding of oneself in relation to one's world and environment. These are the traditions that he tries to pass on to Uncle, even as he doubts whether or not Uncle will ever fully understand. As the Niuhi observes, there is a responsibility to being in the ocean, swimming in the salt blood of the planet. There is a weight to being predator or prey, and it is something you gutbags have forgotten. It is the Niuhi's hope that Uncle might learn to recognize this responsibility. However, when Uncle makes a superfluous and cruel kill to make content for his channel, this possibility for reconnection is foreclosed. Yet the death of Uncle does not bring equilibrium to the narrative. Though it means the end for Uncle, it is the end for the Niuhi too, who has broken his promise and severed his last remaining tie to the old ways that gave him a sense of identity and place. Ultimately, Kuwata shows how the true horror in the story is not just blood, guts, or gore, but the violence that emerges from the severing of our relationships and responsibilities to the more than human world. Rather than preventing us from becoming prey, the violent disavowal of our shared vulnerabilities can only work to objectify us both, human and shark, into nothing more than meat and bone. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you so much to the organizers for this conference, which has been great. Thank you very much to my fellow panelists, and particularly Erin, thank you so much for that paper. It's going to just dovetail just really well. Without further ado. So in 1985, the Australian ecofeminist writer Val Plumwood was canoeing in Kakadu National Park in Australia, which you can see here, when a large crocodile rammed into the side of her canoe. She paddled towards the shore and sort of jumped out of the canoe to grab onto a branch, but as she did so, the crocodile lunged out of the water, grabbed her, and pulled her under the surface. And we are all very lucky, all of us, as well as Val Plumwood, that she not only survived this experience, but was a writer and a philosopher who really dedicated her work to exploring the relationship between humans and non-human beings and non-human ecosystems. And so as she wrote about this moment of the being pulled under the water by this crocodile in her essay, Being Prey. And I apologize for the very long quotation, but I promise it's all important, it'll all come back around. So Plumwood writes here that a framework capable of sustaining action and purpose must, I think, view the world from the inside, structured to sustain the concept of a continuing narrative self. We remake the world in that way as our own, investing it with meaning, reconceiving it as sane, survivable, amenable to hope and resolution. And the lack of fit between this subject-centered version and reality comes into play in extreme moments. In its final frantic attempts to protect itself from the knowledge that threatens the narrative framework, the mind can instantaneously fabricate terminal doubt of extravagant proportions. This is not really happening. This is a nightmare from which I will soon awake. This desperate delusion split apart as I hit the water. And here with desperate delusion, Plumwood was talking both about the sort of immediate circumstances, this kind of endorphic fantasy of the near-death moment, but also this broader delusion that we all carry with us as humans, as conscious beings, this delusion of ourselves as subjects. So this desperate delusion split apart as I hit the water. And in that flash, I glimpsed the world for the first time from the outside, as a world no longer my own, an unrecognizable, bleak landscape composed of raw necessity, indifferent to my life or death. I actually find this to be like a really positive and uplifting essay, though you might not quite get there from this quote here. So Plumwood's essay, I think, is a really kind of foundational text for the eco-critical study of predation. And I want to use it here today to start off a conversation that brings together a few different texts from a few different periods to think through some of these themes of humans, large predators, and power. And my main sort of literary case studies are going to be drawn from the medieval Persian epic tradition, and particularly this being or creature called the Ajdaha. And I'll be looking at two texts in which that creature appears. And then if we have time, we'll bring it back to the present with some sort of post-human, anti-human theory to wrap it all together. Okay. So once again, as Erin just spoke so beautifully about, humans have always had ecological, cultural, and socio-political relationships with our predators, and there's so much evidence of this. We have paleontological evidence, we have art historical and literary evidence from many, many cultures all over the world. We know from a lot of this evidence that predation on humans always has ecological and political relationships. So for instance, we know that the human populations, both in the present and the past, most likely to be subject to predation are communities that are marginalized economically, socially, and ecologically. These tend to be rural peasants and foragers, not urban dwellers, not elites. But at the same time, elites, particularly warrior elites, heroes, kings, colonizers, various humans claiming hierarchical power over other humans have expressed that power through the rhetoric of defeating large predators, and that rhetoric again is both reproduced culturally and visually, but also literally enacted. Ashurbanipal here in Assyria was literally going out and hunting lions who were preying upon his subjects. One of the consequences of this relationship is that large predators, although we know that they are ecologically vital, are disproportionately highly endangered. And this is true essentially globally, and is an accelerating problem, sort of a harbinger and a symptom of ecological collapse more generally. And once again, I don't even need the slide anymore now that you've seen the last presentation. But our fascination, our cultural interest in these sort of encounters endures even as they are less common now than they were in the past, and in fact now are vanishingly common, at least in most places, and for most people, 4 or 5 people are killed a year by sharks, something like that. But it's always in the news, right? If it happens anywhere, you're going to hear about it. And far more people are killed in shark movies every year than are killed in shark reality. Needless to say. And as Erin pointed out, against a backdrop of plummeting populations of not only sharks, but other predators as well. So I want to turn now from real predators to a particular kind of literary being, a particular kind of literary predator called the Ajdaha. And I'm looking at this being within the medieval Persian epic tradition. Okay, so what is an Ajdaha? So etymologically, this word probably means something like snake man or snake barbarian. You'll generally see it translated into English as monster or dragon. Of course, there are issues and complications with those translations, which I'm happy to talk more about in the Q&A. But some combination of reptilian and human traits, some kind of horrific or monstrous hybridization is sort of inherent to this figure. So the work that kind of inaugurates the medieval Persian epic genre is this text called the Shahnameh by Ferdowsi from around 1010 CE, and this is a massive poem. It's maybe the longest poem ever written by one individual person, and it tells this vast legendary history of Iran from sort of the earliest days, the primordial era of creation, up until the Muslim conquests of the mid-7th century. And so in this text, the Ajdaha is not some kind of primordial chaos monster, but rather it's a being that emerges kind of after humans have achieved basically cultural, technological modernity. Which happens early on in the Shahnameh, but once that sort of civilizational mastery of the world has been completed. Into this era appears this being, this person called Zahak, and Zahak's name comes from the same root as Ajdaha. So these are interconnected terms that come from the same origin. So Zahak is a prince who lives in Arabia, and he's kind of seduced into evil by Satan. So Satan convinces him to kill his dad. Satan convinces him to start eating meat. And then Satan kisses his shoulders, and these 2 giant black snakes burst out of his shoulders, and the snakes demand to be fed on human brains. So Zahak, he conquers the world. He's got to keep up a steady supply of human brains for his shoulder snakes. So he's got to conquer the world. And they also sort of give him this immortality. So he reigns over the world for 1,000 tyrannous years. And he is eventually defeated. He's overthrown. He's chained inside a volcano. But he's been very, kind of lustful, lascivious, corrupting during his superhuman lifespan. And so his seed, Tochm or Tochme, endures both sort of literally and figuratively. And so throughout the rest of the epic, throughout the rest of this legendary history, periodically these rampaging Ajdaha will appear, threaten civilization, and a great hero will need to ride out and kill them, according to that cultural script that we're all so familiar with, where the hero's job is to destroy this threatening monster. So at the same time as this pattern is going on, Ajdaha becomes a very frequent metaphor for human aristocratic warriors. So, they'll be described as fierce Ajdaha as they fight in battle. And it's also a very common metaphor for Ruzagar or Zamoneh, which are concepts of kind of time, destiny, fate, and the material world, which are all very intertwined ideas in medieval Persian. So a later, about 100 years, about a century after the Shahnameh, this poem called the Bahman-Nameh is written very much within the sort of same genre and world as the Shahnameh. The Shahnameh is hugely popular, and there are many later works which riff on it, use the same diction, the same meter, the same sort of world. But they tend to shrink down the scope. So the Bahman-Nameh just tells the story of this one particular king, King Bahman, and it revises the account of his death. So in Shahnameh, he just gets sick, dies. It's quite boring. In Bahman-Nameh, he lives this long and kind of cruel, oppressive life. But when he's old, an Ajdaha appears in the countryside, in the landscape. He rides out against it, but instead of following that standard script of hero versus monster, he falls off his horse, and the Ajdaha proceeds to slowly devour him from the feet up. And you're wondering, okay, is he going to be saved? Is he going to be rescued? Then we get to the end of the poem, and we read, fate broke the words in his mouth. He sank into the maw of that Ajdaha. That hissing Ajdaha gulped him down, and his time ended full of misery. Well done, faithless, oppressive time. You don't let men's happiness last, nor their sorrow. And in case we think, maybe this is a metaphor, no, this is a real, very visceral act of predation. We're told then that the Ajdaha kind of slithers away, and then everyone listening can hear the king's bones snapping apart inside the creature's body. And that's that. That's for the there's like another page, but that's pretty much the end of the poem there. It's quite a shocking ending, and I think it's supposed to be. And I think it's a kind of amazing illustration of this idea, to return to Plumwood's essay, that predation in all of its manifestations, but particularly in its ecological, literal enactment, threatens the dualistic visions and divisions which justify rational human mastery of the planet. So to conclude, to kind of try to wrap this up by introducing another complicated text here. So Eugene Thacker, in his book In the Dust of This Planet, he has this concept of what he calls the demon, which he thinks of as the placeholder for some sort of non-human or malefic agency that acts against the human. And one of the things that the demon does is it reveals to us, or drags us into, or makes us aware of what Thacker calls the world without us, which he contrasts with the world for us. And I think they're not exactly the same, but there's a lot of overlap between these concepts and what Plumwood calls the world from the inside. That is our subject-centered view of the world, and the world from the outside, which for Plumwood is the world of ecological reality, the reality of our enmeshment in ecological systems. And I just find it fascinating that in the medieval Persian epic tradition, we have this equation of these terms of Ajdaha, the monster, the predatory beast, who is also a human tyranny, Zamoner, Ruzgar, time or fate as this kind of devouring force, and Giti or Jahan, which is the material world, the space in which those things happen, and locates that emergence, literally from the human body. And so I think, for us in the Anthropocene, surrounded by these monstrous hyper-objects that have emerged from our relentless consumption, from our attempts to detach ourselves from ecology, think of things like climate change, like pandemics, like authoritarian regimes. I think thinking about the intertwining and interrelationship of these concepts can be really fruitful. So thank you very much.
Good morning. It's nice to see you all. Again, my name is Madison. I'm very excited to be here today and to share some of my research with you all. The working title of my paper is The Abysmal Devourer, Monstrosity and Abjection in Alejandro Sieveking's La Mantis Religiosa, which translates to The Praying Mantis. Alejandro Sieveking was a Chilean actor, director, and playwright. He directed the premiere of his play, La Mantis Religiosa, in Santiago, Chile in 1971. This would be Sieveking's last premiered play before the 1973 Chilean coup d'etat, which imposed a dictatorship that would last until 1990. The Pinochet regime was marked by tyranny, persecution, and censorship that repressed cultural and artistic expression in Chile and drove tens of thousands of Chileans into political exile, one of whom was Alejandro Sieveking. And similar themes of exile, isolation, and polarization are also evident in the play. I'm going to start with a little abstract of my paper, and then we'll talk about the world of the play. I'll give you a summary of the characters and the actions, and then we'll talk about notions of monstrosity and elements of abjection. In La Mantis Religiosa, the character of Teresa is never seen by the audience, only heard from behind a carved wooden door through knocking, scratching, wailing, and moaning, the language of the abject. Teresa's three sisters describe her as a hideous monster, a disgusting animal, and a filthy insect, comparing her likeness to that of a praying mantis. In this paper, I dissect notions of female monstrosity through the image and symbolism of the praying mantis, a creature intricately linked to the animal kingdom through elements of cannibalism, decapitation, sensuality, seduction, and death. As a visually dubious female body, hybridized of human and insectile features, Teresa dwells in the space of the abject, the in-between, the ambiguous, the composite, as posed by Julia Kristeva in Powers of Horror. Yet, even from her place of banishment, the allure of the praying mantis draws in many male prey, as Teresa seductively entices and sexually devours the boyfriends of her three sisters, regaining autonomy through this monstrous consumption and subversive monstrous nourishment. The visual absence of Teresa's body perpetuates a sublime essence that, I argue, is conjured up through her fragmented and abject existence as both monster and saint, sacred and profane, and above all, the ambiguous. La Mantis Religiosa is set in a large, dark room that should give the impression of being part of an immense house in Talcahuana in South Central Chile. It is adorned with Baroque furniture and a large grandfather clock, masked in heavy plush curtains, diffuse light, an old sofa, and walls that are papered in purple. They almost seem black. The centerpiece of this dilapidated space is a great carved wooden door that draws the audience's gaze from the rear of the stage. This weary house is home to 3 lovesick sisters. Oh, we have Lala and Lena, both dressed in mourning attire, and their younger sister, Adela, who is dressed in a light summer dress. Their father, Aparicio, seems to be a nuisance to his daughters, considering he only descends from upstairs to taunt and tease them or burst into drunken soliloquies. The major conflict between Aparicio and these 3 visible sisters is the mysterious being who lives trapped behind the carved wooden door. Locked away and never emerging from her caged space, Teresa, the 4th sister, is tolerated by her 3 sisters as they feed her live chickens for sustenance, but she is simultaneously excluded, being physically separated or exiled and emotionally taunted. So at the top of the play, Lala, Lena, and Adela meticulously prepare the home for a visitor. Adela is expecting her love interest and primary suitor, Juan, who works at the bank in the capital of Santiago. While Juan also grew up in Talcahuana, Lala and Lena are skeptical of the purpose of his visit. They fear he may be a spy, a detective from the big city, investigating the puzzling deaths of their former lovers, Jorge and Carlos. The sisters proclaim their innocence as Lala conspicuously tells Juan, "My uncle, the judge, also said I was innocent." Consumed by town gossip, the visible sisters hint at their desire to leave Chile. Adela wants Juan to take her far away, and Lala and Lena spend their time trying to seduce Juan for themselves, reminding him that they are normal, human, and virgin. Soon after arriving, Juan hears the noises and murmurs coming from Teresa's lair, which piques a prevailing curiosity within him. The sisters assure him that Teresa has been sick since the day she was born, deformed, and too disgusting to be seen, as Juan grows more enticed through their vague deflections. "I'm not hiding anything. I told you that. She's not exactly a human being. Have you ever heard of a praying mantis?" "No, what's that?" "It's a species of, but it's pretty. Her face. If it wasn't for, I can't tell you." After being left alone in the sitting room, Juan is overcome with curiosity and lured to the carved wooden door by Teresa's sing-song murmur, the first time she clearly articulates words. "Open the door, come to me, please." Juan cannot resist this temptation and later emerges almost completely naked and covered in scratches after being dragged out by the 3 visible sisters. Persuaded by Lala and Lena, Adela continues the repetition of missing lovers by murdering Juan with a single pistol shot to the head. The visible sisters are left in a daze and remain static on stage. Behind the door, Teresa begins to cry. I place Teresa, the praying mantis, as the monster of focus, the only character hybridized with human and animalistic features, a filthy insect, a corporeality composed of fragments. Leading monster theorist Jeffrey Jerome Cohen posits that any kind of alterity can be inscribed across or constructed through the monstrous body, but for the most part, monstrous difference tends to be cultural, political, racial, economic, sexual. Michael Chandler's filters Cohen's monstrous theses through the ephemeral lens of performance, noting the appearance of the monster is ontologically impossible, as the creature is both real and artificial, echoing Teresa's visually dubious nature. I center Teresa's hybridized corporeality and her sexually deviant consumption as primary markers of her constructed monstrosity, materialized on stage through signifiers of monstrous passing that stand in for the monstrous body itself. Teresa's hybridized existence produces a binary reaction from the other characters on stage, as the male characters, Aparicio and Juan, see her as an angel, and the female characters, the sisters, see her as a beast, and Lena bemoans Teresa's antithetical construction. It's irritating to see a monster adored as if she were a saint. Yet, Cohen warns that monstrous bodies possess a haunting complexity, making it difficult to dissect and contain them in a simple binary dialectic, for they live beyond the limits of the thinkable. The haunting complexity of Teresa's monstrous hybridity can be seen through the body, actions, and symbolism of the female praying mantis, a captivating and fierce insect that typically grows larger and heavier than its male counterpart. In her article, Seeking Whom to Devour, Raquel Velazquez explores the allure and enchantment of the female praying mantis, which has aroused the greatest fascination in cultures of all latitudes, as an insect paradoxically sacred and diabolical, seductive and annihilating. With elongated bodies and smooth outer shells, female mantes exude a sort of corporeal elegance that is monsterized by raptorial front legs for capturing prey. While Teresa's hybridized body is never fully seen, its absence continues to enrapture the audience and her male prey. After Juan emerges from the sanctuary of the praying mantis, his body bears the effects of her raptorial construction, a visual signifier of monstrous passing. All he has on is torn underpants and pieces of what might have been a shirt. He has scratches on his arms, on his chest, and on his ribs. Teresa's fusion of angelic and demonic qualities is highlighted through the juxtaposition of Juan's disheveled appearance and his purified mentality after his encounter with the female monster. Disability studies scholar Billy Anderson notes that since the monster can freely exist outside of the rigid confines of the binary, it conjures up fear, desire, and envy of the monstrous body. And as such, it allures non-monstrous identities to the potential of existence. Juan's encounter with the monstrous body exemplifies this potential of renewed existence as he emerges in a state of complete ecstasy, purified by Teresa's sexual deviation, proclaiming, "But she's perfect. The stars were falling in all directions. Now I realize I was like a lifeless plant. I didn't understand anything. I looked at things without really seeing them. And now the whole universe has opened to me." As Teresa is perpetuated by her sisters as the deviant female monster, a dangerous and deadly force, Adela is the one to shoot Juan with a single pistol shot to the head, echoing the cannibalistic practice of the female praying mantis postcoital, the swallowing of the male mate's head as a source of nourishment and a symbol of dominance. Sieveking constructs Teresa with a haunting complexity by troubling the spectatorial expectation of the female monster as she delivers purification and her human sister delivers death. Additionally, Sieveking situates Teresa's fragmented body/identity in the abyss, as she is spatially and gesturally seated in the obscure and symbolized through the mystifying voices of her master sisters, as seen in this poem that Adela performs for Juan in the sitting room, the Abysmal Devourer, which acts as an oral/aural signifier of monstrous passing. Teresa, the Abysmal Devourer, is seated in the obscure and therefore in a space of abjection, posited by Julia Kristeva as the in-between, the ambiguous, the composite. As Cohen notes, the monster's very existence is a rebuke to boundary and enclosure, and therefore the monster embodies abjection, that which does not respect borders, positions, rules, and disturbs identity, system, order. Teresa transcends borders by existing in the abyss, and she disturbs identity with her ambiguous corporeality. Kristeva notes that the ultimate signifier of abjection appears through narration, when the abject yields to a crying out theme, a theme of suffering horror, which is articulated through a recasting of syntax and vocabulary, the violence of poetry and silence. For the narrative of the abject, its linearity is shattered. It proceeds by flashes, enigmas, shortcuts, incompletion, tangles, and cuts, as epitomized in Teresa's dialogue. The violence of poetry, it's a sing-song murmur. Incompletion and tangles, pieces of words are heard. Give me, do you hear me? Kristeva notes that abjection also rests as the other facet of religious, moral, and ideological codes. Abjection fluctuates between purification and repression. In religious ceremonies, abjection takes on the form of the exclusion of a substance, nutritive or linked to sexuality, the execution of which coincides with the sacred. From her place of imprisonment, Teresa is excluded from nutrients and sexual pleasure, but this sacred sacrifice is also permeable as the male spectators cross the boundary for Teresa's consumption and become tainted by the sacred, seen through Juan's devoted nature and sheer ecstasy. While Sieveking does not explicitly denote blood in the stage directions, the image of Juan after emerging from the abject space implies its presence. Recall this stage direction from earlier. The element of blood plays a similarly abject role to Teresa in that it is dually sacred and profane, substance and transgression, considering the Christian sacrament of bread and wine symbolizes or materializes the flesh and blood of Christ. As seen in the end of the poem, if you fall into the abyss, she'll eat you like this lovely miss. Adela warns Juan about Teresa, implying a cannibalistic essence to her existence. And while Juan emerges in profane fashion, covered in scratches and blood, he is purified by the sacred Teresa. In her veiled and duplicitous existence, Teresa's abject positioning and ethereal construction evokes an essence of the sublime. An experience so complex that our inability to form a clear mental conception of it leads to the sense of the inadequacy of our imagination. We cannot encompass it by thinking, and so it remains indiscernible or unnameable, undecidable, indeterminate, and unpresentable. This incomprehensible articulation of the sublime resonates with the morphologically dubious body of Teresa, who is never solidified in the flesh, never confirmed for the mind. Eliciting both fear and fascination, Teresa's sublime nature parallels conceptions of the Judeo-Christian God, whose countenance is both terrifying and beautiful, provoking fear and awe in the spectator. Seen in this verse from the book of Psalms, "My flesh trembles for fear of you." Lastly, Kristeva offers abjection as that which is edged with the sublime. For the abject, like Teresa, operates in sublime alienation, a forfeited existence. Kristeva approaches the sublime as an active experience, a psychoanalytic encounter that transforms the enraptured subject. The sublime is a something added that expands us, overstrains us, and causes us to be both here as dejects and there as others and sparkling. A divergence, an impossible bounding. Kristeva's edging of the abject with the sublime epitomizes Juan's elated counter with Teresa as he emerges both tainted and purified, expanded and overstrained, brought to an impossible bounding. Teresa, the abject and monstrous mantis, the abysmal devourer, lurks in liminal spaces, but also dwells beyond the limits of the thinkable. Thank you.
We have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. I will run the mic and also deliver the mic. I'll perhaps hand this way that you can pass between yourselves as we get there. For our audience, any questions for our panel on creature features? Yes. Coming to you. As a reminder, this mic doesn't amplify, it's all for the recording, so please speak up for the panelists.
Thank you very much. That was really a marvelous, in both senses, panel. So I have a question about literature, I guess, for particularly Madison, but maybe for everybody. The whole time that I was listening to the panel, I was thinking about that Val Plumwood piece, which I always, in literature classes, started with, because it's such a great narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. In any case, so thank you for reminding me about that. I guess I'd like to ask a specific question to Madison about this play. So is it translated into English?
Yes, it was translated into English in 1986 by
Okay.
Charles Philip Thomas.
Okay, good. Well, I've been spending the year thinking a lot about Franz Kafka. And of course, I feel like the metamorphosis was haunting everybody's presentation. And I was particularly, when I was working on Kafka, there are, as any of you who are familiar with this know, there are questions about what the bug was. And it's called a vermin in the English translation. So it's generally assumed that that it's a cockroach. But it would be very interesting to think about the story, the metamorphosis, if you imagined the bug as a louse instead of a cockroach, because of course it's a complete scale violation when Gregor Samsa turns into this vermin, as I said, which is generally understood as a cockroach. It would be interesting to do a reading of this story where you imagine the representation of it to be that it's a louse, not a cockroach. Anyway, so that just seems provocative to me. But I was thinking about vermin in general, and that it would be great to do a special issue of a journal on vermin and have your papers. And I mean, we can't maybe necessarily think of sharks as vermin, but you know, the distinction between predator and prey, of course, is particularly important, I think, in what you're doing here. Anyway, so thank you very much. Those are just some thoughts I had. I'd be happy to have any comments from any of you.
Those are great, thank you.
Yeah. I actually do have a comment. Just, I've also heard dung beetle is like really quite accepted as what, but I mean, yes, it's all conjectural. The other thing is, I wanted to say, my husband and I not this past summer, but the summer before, we were at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and they did a staging of the Metamorphosis, which was marvelous, hysterical, and it was an actual conversation between Freud and Gregor Samsa, and exploring his backstory, you know. Oh, and now the tragic story. But also with puppets. So you had this, it was kind of a cockroach thing coming out, and, you know, that's all you saw, but you did see a little glimpse of bug, more or less a silhouette. It was tremendously moving, hysterically funny, and if you ever get a chance to see if they do a staging of it, you gotta go. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a cheeky question for the whole panel about what these monstrous beings like really want, right? So for Madison and for Sharon, you know, what would veneration of Saint Teresa and Saint Louse look like? For Erin and for Sam, like, how could we make ourselves most appetizing to the Ajdaha or to the sharks, especially the mythic ones who don't eat humans? You mentioned that specific story, so I'm just curious if there's like, what do they want, you know?
I had to cut this down a lot for time, but there are so many different mythical sharks, and they all want different things, which is actually fascinating because they get personalized in that way. There's certain, right, Amakua sharks, what they want is they want human interaction. So the way that they get taken care of generally is that, like they get part of the catch, right? So like they get to, they're kind of made sure that there's enough food in the ecosystem, and kind of looked out for. With the killer sharks, there's so many different specific legends about different killer sharks, and as I was briefly showing that map, and what's interesting about them is that they do pop up at known shark sites, which also, especially on Maui, happen to coincide with like surf spots, right? But the sharks were always tracked to have been there through these legends, and some of them really just want to eat people, like some of them do, but they want their territory, I think is what those stories kind of come down to tell us. So I don't know if any individual can make themselves appetizing, but maybe if you go to that particular space and just hang out a little bit, you might.
I think the Ajdaha often wants power and wants to consume power, and of course, in the consumption of power it's a sort of unattainable appetite, and sometimes, again, I think like in the story of Bahman, there's always a greater power implied, which is this kind of cosmic mortality, cosmic force of fate, which all kind of human or anthropocentric conceptions of power are weaker, or ultimately weaker than, ultimately kind of fall under that greater power.
I would say from an actor's perspective, I should know what Teresa's objective is, and it should be ingrained in my mind with her intentions. Maybe it's to get revenge, maybe it's to escape, maybe it's to feel the warmth of the sun on her shell or her skin. Maybe she wants cooked chicken instead of a live chicken. I don't know. But I would say, I think the ambiguity of her want is just as strong, and I can make guesses, but I think there's real beauty in kind of not knowing, and letting that guide me as well. So thank you for the question.
Food, and don't kill him. Don't kill me. Don't kill me. No squishing, no squashing, no mashing, but he ends up being venerated. I don't think that's his but moral. I don't really think so. I think that's what humans see as, well, it's a miracle. It's he's a martyr, and he doesn't do miracles. There are other saints that do miracles. Saint Onion makes people cry when they ordinarily wouldn't. And but this guy is a saint because he's other attributes. So yeah, don't kill me, and let me feed.
Thank you.
Sorry, I thought of just one more thing while they were talking, which was just that I think what it is respect. Because I was thinking, as you're talking, I was like, you know what? All the things that all these legends have in common is that people are like, the people who survive are the ones who are very respectful. They're like, hello, may I come into this space? I understand this is your territory. And that's sort of the key, as with a lot of, I think, folk tales.
I'm going to risk being elementary in this room full of incredible scholars. But one thing I've discovered this week as I've listened to everybody is that it seems like in a lot of these tales and stories and myths that the humans turn out to be the monsters. And I just wonder how you might speak to that. While we study all this monstrosity and we talk about the monstrous or the monster, very often it seems like the person who does not respect the fishing limits, angers and becomes eaten by the monster, and the person who wants power rather than to help his people. And the three sisters who are supposedly caretakers, right? I think I'm okay with lice being monsters.
And
but
yet he's also a victim when
he-
you try to kill him.
when they squash him, right? So I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just briefly, something I find really interesting about this being is that on the one hand, it is sort of fully human. It literally bursts out of human flesh and is an outgrowth of human civilization and human relationships with the natural world. But it's also kind of defiantly anti-human. It's also this sort of unthinkable cosmic force, and the fact that those two things that's that paradox is sort of expressed through narrative and is worked out through narrative, I think is really provocative and interesting in the subtext.
Yeah, I would say I guess in the beginning, we have binary logic, so it's so hard to talk about monster and normal because we tend to posit normal humans and different monsters over there, but the binary is actually the problem because they're not separated, they're not opposites, there's a lot of space in between there. But I think we are conditioned and trained to believe that we are not the others, we are not the monsters, and I think that infiltrates a little bit the way that we talk about it and the way that we discuss it, and just remembering that humans are indeed monsters and creatures, and they're all on the similar plane. So.
Fantastic. I think that puts us right in time for our coffee break. Let's thank our wonderful panelists again.